Hey guys, it's Jordan with Fox and the Sawdust, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a hard maple farmhouse style table with modern steel legs. Or more than likely, though, what I'll be showing you is several ways not to do that. If this is your first time to my channel, let me give you a little background. I've only been woodworking for about 4 years, and only full-time for about a year, so if you're looking for a master craftsman with 9 fingers teaching you the best way to do a rabbet joint or a dovetail, then there are some channels I could recommend. Mostly what you're going to see with me is a guy learning a lot about the wrong way to do things. If that sounds like your particular brand of cracker, then stick around. What I'm doing here is just pulling out the lumber that I've selected for this specific table. I got these from my local hard lumber supplier. It is hard maple, and I specifically chose some pieces with a lot of color in it, which you're going to see when the final product is done. If any of you have watched woodworking videos before on YouTube, you'll see that there are a ton of different videos that teach you the proper way to joint a board. Unfortunately, I haven't found any that teach you the proper way to joint a board on a jointer when the board is 8 feet or longer. I've only got a 2-foot Craftsman, well, I guess it's a 6-inch Craftsman jointer with a 2-foot reference table, so really difficult, if not impossible, to joint a board properly on that. So what I've taken to doing is just jointing my boards with my track saw. What I've got here is the Craig adaptive cutting system, which is a decent saw, decent adaptive cutting system. The issue that I ran into it was a little underpowered at times, and I actually burnt through a couple of them as I was cutting through a couple of different tables that I did. So the company was very accommodating when I called them and just said that, I burnt through the saw as I was just using it for normal use. They just almost no questions asked sent me one immediately. The shipping was quick. The customer service was outstanding. So if for no other reason than the customer service is really good, Craig is a really good saw to use. I did run into one other really small issue with the Craig saw, which you're going to see a little bit later in the video. But as you can see, it is a nice clean cut, and as far as track saws go, this one is fairly inexpensive and still does a fairly good job. So for those of you who are garage craftsmen, you'll probably be in a similar position that I'm in at this moment, where I'm working out of my garage. I don't have my shop built yet, although we are in the process of doing it. So I don't have a ton of space. So I am setting up my shop right now in the garage to maximize as much space as I can, which means my planer is right off of my work table and doesn't have an outfeed table. So I got these outfeed rollers for sending the wood through the planer and still catching it without it actually falling off of the backside of the planer. And they're pretty good. They're just Harbor Freight. They were pretty inexpensive and they do the job, but as you can see, sometimes it's a bit of a pain in the neck trying to figure out exactly how to get the wood through the planer without causing a headache. But this is me trying to figure out exactly how to push the boards through. The table isn't exactly level with the table that I have the planer on, so this is kind of the issue that I run into, is trying to figure out exactly how to do this. You can kind of see the distance there of the setup that I have. Like I said, this maple is going to work this planer pretty good. It's just a Craftsman planer that I got from Lowe's, maybe Home Depot, can't remember. Anyway, but yeah, send all the boards through here to plane them to the exact same depth. And I did wind up using those rollers just on the table, and it was a lot easier. Those are actually trampoline poles that I have on that table. But in the end, they did the trick, and as you can see here, a nice, very satisfying shot of the board being planed down. Did the same for all the boards, and obviously, if you're a woodworker, you know the trick is to run all the boards through before you adjust the depth again on the planer to make sure that they all are exactly right. So if you'll remember the first part of the video when I was running the track saw down the edge of the boards, I had some difficulty getting it started. And that's the problem that you have with track saws. If you don't do it in one fluid cut, you can wind up with little steps like that, little places where the saw blade didn't quite get all the way through, or just as you were trying to fix it, it causes these little, I don't even know what you call them. I'm going to call it a step because it kind of looks like a step. But these difficulties, these checks in the wood that you got to make sure that you take good care of. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that there was one problem that I had with the Craig track saw other than it being underpowered, is that occasionally the angle is off. And that's exactly what happened here. When I took my square, you can see that little sliver of light that shows me that the angle was not quite exact. Now, there are some other saws that cost a little bit more money that you don't need to worry about this so much. They lock in at the 0-degree position, so you don't have to have an issue with that. But for those of you that are still getting started or just trying to figure it out, like I am, the Craig track saw, again, is an inexpensive option. And if you set the angle up right, then you just don't have any problems. As you can see here, you just got to fix it. So now I've got this little jimmy rig table that I made out of a couple of sawhorses and some OSB. I'm covering with some plastic because I don't want the glue to get all over the plastic, but it's time for the glue up. This panel clamping system that I bought was ridiculously expensive, more so because I wound up opting to buy some square tubing so that I could actually set these up and have this clamp the table the way that I want it to. These clamps are intended to give equal pressure in 4 different directions. So I'm trying them out on this table. Now this is a hard maple table with 8 1/4-inch boards, or 2 inches thick. So it's a very difficult table to clamp if you're trying to do them all at the same time. So this is a really good test to see if these things actually work. Otherwise, I'm going to be frustrated that I was out as much money as I was. And I guess on a side note, that's kind of what I'm learning as I'm beginning my journey as a woodworker, as a craftsman, as a custom furniture builder, is that oftentimes I wind up doing things that just don't work. I can't tell you how much money I've blown on projects that I thought would wind up cool, or that I built that I thought was really cool that wound up not making any money, or buying tools that I thought would help that wound up not helping very much. And I guess I'll just go ahead and spoil it and say that this clamping system was one of those things. It wound up not doing exactly as well as I had hoped. I spent nearly $1,000 on this system, between the clamps, between the square tubing, between needing to put the rivets in that could hold the screws, to hold the plastic bits that hold the clamps. I just wound up spending a ton more money on this than I anticipated, and in the end, it didn't quite do exactly as I'd hoped. It did an okay job, but the main purpose of me buying those clamps was to save me time with the sanding, by hoping that I could just clamp all of the boards together at once and that they would all be perfectly level. But they weren't. To be totally fair to the clamping system, I might have not jointed the boards properly. You remember how you saw earlier how the track saw was off 1 degree? I'm wondering if that might have happened to some of these boards, that they were just slightly off, and that's why it didn't clamp exactly the way I'd hoped. But as you'll see here, in the end I wound up needing to sand and sand and sand and sand and sand to get it exactly the way that I needed it to be. And if anyone out there has a good technique to get a nice level surface with a belt sander, I am all ears. I struggle with that. Every time I break that thing out, I just know I'm going to have to do a lot more finish sanding to get it exactly right. So again, anyone that has an idea about exactly how to do that better, please don't be afraid to reach out. I am all ears. So you can see a decent shot of the bark edge that's on that table. I'm keeping part of it live. The majority of this table is going to have a nice, clean, trimmed edge, but I thought it'd be cool to have a little bit of it just with the live bark that was on there. I'm kind of experimenting with how to make that stay on the table for good. I'm going to do it with epoxy this time around, so we'll see how it works. This is just a can of spray shellac that I'm using to seal the ends to prevent warping while I'm working on the final coat. I use shellac primarily because it dries a lot faster than polyurethane or a lot of the other finishes. Just makes life a little easier. I'm chipping the bark out of the knots and voids that are in the center of the table. I like the rustic look, so I keep a lot of the knots and voids in. I'm going to fill this with CA glue. So right now I'm just using a small chisel to chip out all the loose bark in the center of the table and then spraying it out. I'd like to have some nicer chisels and some micro tools and stuff, but yeah, I'm broke. So this is CA glue, cyanoacrylate, or what's it called? Super glue. Super glue. Just regular old super glue. Hear a lot of woodworkers using this, so it's the first time I've ever done it. and you'll see why it was a big mistake the way that I did it. That void is about 1 inch deep and about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, give or take. And you're going to see in a little while why it was such a problem. Of course, once the CA glue is cured, you break out the sander here to take care of all of those little pits and voids that you filled. This light helps me just see what needs to be sanded. So as you can see from this shot, what happened when you put the CA glue in there and you use the accelerant, if it's too deep, then only the top cures, but the bottom doesn't. So I had about 1 inch deep of CA glue that was seeping out the top every time you put any pressure on it, and I just knew something was going to go wrong with that. So this was an arduous process, but you know, you got to do the right thing. So I took some toothpicks and I just chipped out all of that CA glue as much as you possibly could anyway, and went at it a different way. What I wound up doing was still CA glue, but in layers. So I'd put a little bit in there at a time, then spray some of the accelerant, then a little bit more, then spray some of the accelerant. In the end, it wound up working exactly the way that I had hoped. So I learned from Cam at Blacktail Studio, who has one of the largest woodworking channels on YouTube, that what I'm about to do is called a chamfer, or just an angled cut on the bottom of the table is all the chamfer really is, just to give it a nice profile, to make it look a little bit different from your standard table. There's not a ton of people out there that are doing this, although I bet that number is increasing. It is a nice profile, and so this is the first time I've ever done it. And I didn't even measure on this, I just kind of eyeballed it, which was probably stupid, in fact, very stupid. But in the end, you'll see it wound up doing exactly what I expected it to do. Hey, more CA. This rustic maple is rustic hard maple. It had a lot of little cracks and little checks and stuff like that. So I'm just taking the CA glue to cover a lot of them. This is actually the bottom side of the table, so not really like anyone's going to see this part very much, but mostly to make sure that it doesn't get any moisture inside the wood over time, that there doesn't become any problems. I don't want it to break. I don't want it to crack. I want it to last a good long time for whoever winds up getting it. This is more sanding. Surprise, surprise, sanding it is. So I'm just sanding down the pits and the stuff that I just filled with the CA glue. Since my experiment with CA glue went so well, I figured I would try a different thing to try to seal up the live edge on the table with the bark. So this is actually epoxy. The first time I've ever used epoxy resin to try to seal up a live edge like this, so just experimenting with it. Got these cheap little brushes from Harbor Freight. It was like $5 for a pack of 50 of these things, and so I'm just taking this little brush and brushing on the epoxy just on the live edge bark and the portions that I feel like need to be sealed really well before I do the final coat. And after I let it cure for a couple of days, I went over the rest of the table with a 3/8 round over. So it's got a nice big round over on the top with a 28-degree chamfer, maybe 30. I really honestly don't remember what degree it was on the chamfer, but it looks nice in the end. The customer wound up really enjoying the look of that. So what I'm doing here is called water popping. There's a big discrepancy between what people believe about what water popping does, or if it's even of any value at all in the woodworking community. But what it's intended to do is open the grain up and allow it to accept the stain or finishes a little bit better. And this is Rubio Monocoat. Any woodworker worth his salt should be familiar with this product. Gives a really good protective finish while also a really beautiful luster. And this is my first time using Rubio Monocoat as well. Just an experiment, want to see what it does, and I gotta say, I'm very pleased with the results. Unfortunately, I actually lost the footage of me applying it, so if you want to see how to apply Rubio, there's plenty of videos out there to show you how to do it. or you'll see it in a future video. But this is the final product. You can kind of see all of that natural luster in the wood and how beautiful that shines through in the figure. All of the different variants in color is really, I think, very attractive. I wound up just putting some steel X-style legs on the bottom. They were a touch shaky, so I put a cross member in it for support, little 4x4 redwood. I also learned a lot about how not to do this in the future with the mistakes that I made, which were plentiful on this table, but it turned out well. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.